Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we finally are going to be discussing this case out of Baltimore where a CEO was killed in her own building by a criminal who unsurprisingly should have never been on the streets in the first place. However, unlike the other videos that we talk about on this channel, I want to make this clear. While there is a policy failure, while there is a culprit behind his early release, this also has to do with your own personal security and how things in our culture are telling women, specifically white women, to not respond to obvious threats of danger and not get out of these clearly avoidable situations as to not be labeled a Karen. We're going to talk about all of this. I think it's incredibly important, but before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. Now, I actually want to start off this story by talking about the perpetrator because it's important for us to get through the policy failure before we talk about the broader cultural implications that I think may have played a contributing factor in this particular incident. So the perpetrator of this crime, or the alleged perpetrator of this crime, because he hasn't been convicted for this, is a man called Jason Billingsley. Now, Jason Billingsley actually has a lengthy criminal history, and he recently got out of prison after serving a 9-year stint for sexual assault. This was quite a violent sexual assault, which is why this guy actually had a 30-year sentence. However, 16 years of the 30-year sentence was supposed to be suspended, meaning that he was supposed to serve at least 14 years in lockup. However, he was released early. Now, the reason why he was released early is because the Baltimore state's attorney at the time, Marilyn Mosby, is one of these woke left-wing, I'm trying to let out everybody kind of prosecutors, and she decided for this heinous assault, he deserved to get out 5 years early. Unfortunately, this led Billingsley to not only commit this crime while he was out, but he actually committed an additional crime, which was an aggravated sexual assault, unsurprisingly, and an attempted murder, and I believe he was wanted because he tried to set that building on fire, so there was an arson incorporated with that. So, absolutely horrible. That woman ended up surviving, by the way. He did slit her throat, so he definitely tried to kill her. But it's very important for you to know that the police were actually looking for this individual in connection with that crime when he decided to commit this brutal murder against this Baltimore CEO. So this guy should have never been out in the first place. Of course, we have a woke district attorney that's behind this, who, by the way, has been indicted on corruption charges. She's also the person who put on that clown show in order to release Adnan Syed, who is 100% guilty. She did so for good PR because the podcast Serial made that case famous. But just so you know, this is the kind of district attorney that we're dealing with. This is the policy failure that we're dealing with. And we probably should, especially in areas like Baltimore, which are some of the most dangerous places on planet Earth, not elect prosecutors that are trying to get criminals out of jail, and maybe think about electing some prosecutors that want to keep criminals inside prison, lock them up, remove them from society where they can't commit heinous crimes like this.
Hey guys, I'm Pava, and I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm actually one of those weird types of entrepreneurs because my job is to help other people become entrepreneurs. And I do that through this really niche thing called entrepreneurial ecosystem development. And I know that absolutely nobody grows up telling their parents that they want to be an entrepreneurial ecosystem developer.
Now look, the perpetrator is only half of this story. The victim is the person whose face you've been seeing across the news media, and that is Baltimore CEO Pava. And this is a woman, I believe she was 26 years old at the time, who is actually striving to make it easier for other people to become entrepreneurial, which is an interesting thing that she talked about during this TED Talk-like event that she was at that you may have seen clips from.
Right? But it's actually a job that impacts every single one of our lives every single day. But it's something that we hardly ever think about. But before I tell you why we should care about these things or why we should think about building them in a very specific way, I should probably tell you what the hell an entrepreneurial ecosystem even is, right? So it is the intersection between all of the entrepreneurs, the startups, small businesses, and nonprofits that they create, the resources and institutions that support them, and the community that is impacted by their ventures, right?
Now look, all of this seems wholesome and good, and honestly, I am in support of it. Obviously, part of the American dream is this entrepreneurial spirit. Obviously, we are a nation of innovators. There's a reason why so many things were invented in the United States of America. There's a reason why so many people come here in order to try to make it. And if she's trying to foster an environment for upcoming entrepreneurs. That sounds all good in the hood, nothing to worry about. And also, she wanted to help improve the situation in Baltimore, which I find to be incredibly admirable. However, you might have heard this, and if not, I'm going to play you the evidence for it. This woman would definitely be considered one of these woke white women or woke tech CEOs, whatever you want to call her. And this was also evidenced by that very same talk.
So it is really important that we set up these ecosystems in a very specific way. Because if we are not intentional about how we build entrepreneurial ecosystems, we end up like the rest of the business, corporate, and educational world, where your chance of success as an entrepreneur is about 900% greater if you happen to be born a rich white man, right?
Look, this should go without saying, but I'm going to have to say it anyway because I've seen some of your comments, and some of you don't seem to get where I'm coming from on these particular issues. There's absolutely nothing wrong with non-white male entrepreneurs. There's never been a problem with that in the United States of America. In fact, even when we had discriminatory laws, we had groups in this country who were discriminated against who became very successful entrepreneurs because the entrepreneurial spirit, the market economy, and all that can shine through almost all of the so-called systemic barriers that you have to worry about. So I'm not against her in trying to make her focus minorities, especially when she moved to a place like Baltimore, which is majority black, and she's trying to foster entrepreneurial spirit. Obviously, in some way, shape, or form, she's trying to live up to those values with her actions. So credit where credit is due. We're not trying to attack the dead woman in this scenario. The real monster in this case is Billingsley, and we should never lose sight of that. And we can also lay some of the blame on Marilyn Mosby, who let this dangerous individual out of prison because she, of course, too, is also one of these woke, insane people.
So our goal as we create entrepreneurial ecosystems needs to be making them equitable and accessible.
Now, with that being said, the reason this particular sentiment should be highlighted is because we ended up finding out through the additional information put forward by law enforcement, and it's confirmed by surveillance video, that Billingsley didn't break into the building or anything like that. He, in fact, followed this woman home without her noticing, and then after she had already entered the building, he somehow convinced her to let him in, got in the elevator with him, and that ultimately ended up leading to her murder.
Charging documents say LePere let the suspect into the building where she lived and worked last Friday night around 11 p.m. And that security footage shows them getting into an elevator together. The documents say LePere's half-clothed body was found on the roof. The cause of death, strangulation and blunt force trauma.
And honestly, this clearly should not have been done in any way, shape, or form, and you out there in the world should be able to detect some of these threat indicators that would allow you to not be victimized in a similar way. Again, this is not about victim blaming or anything like that. This is about an ideology that has convinced women to ignore their instincts, their protective instincts, their avoidance of danger instincts, in order to not seem like a potential Karen. Now look, I'm an adult man. I'm somebody who is not very fearful of a bunch of different things, but I'm also a New Yorker, and I know people who live in these big buildings. I have relatives that live in these big buildings. I have future in-laws that live in these big buildings, and I'm going to tell you, rich, poor, doesn't matter. The number one rule of living in a building like this is you don't let people in that you don't know, period, point blank. Absolutely not, under no circumstances, and even in those little circumstances where you would bend the rules based on the context clues, it requires you to be analytical of the situation. So if I see somebody who's like an old lady, she's carrying groceries, clearly just came back from the grocery store, then I may break that rule if that lady is knocking because she lost her key and or whatever. But the thing is, those rules, again, are broken in few and far between instances. Billingsley looks like this. Now, whenever I do a story where the perpetrator in that story happens to be a black person, I will always, without fail, and I swear, I believe this is the same person doing a copy and paste, get a comment that says, a story like this makes it incredibly difficult to not be racist. This is stupid, this is ridiculous, and this is patently absurd. And I say this as somebody who probably more accurately breaks down the disparity in terms of crime statistics between all the different groups in the United States of America. it's incredibly easy to not be racist. A bunch of these stories that I cover, the victim in that story happens to be a black person as well, so that doesn't make any sense. And more crucially, there's about 1 million black people that I would let in over this individual because there are so many red flags just based on his face alone that should warn you away from letting this person in. And a lot of these red flags, by the way, happen to be race neutral. First and foremost, the guy has neck tattoos. When I see crappy neck tattoos like this, you know what I think? This guy just got out of prison. This is clear and obvious. Secondly, this is a Baltimore CEO, meaning that she lives in a building where other wealthy people tend to live. You're going to tell me that this guy with the neck tattoos that looks like he got out of prison yesterday looks like an ordinary resident of this particular place. Again, take race out of it for a second. Show me a guy who's white, looks like he just got out of prison with neck tattoos, and tell me it makes sense to let that individual in. Obviously, no, that doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever. Now, there may be a chance that this individual could have been a multi-platinum gangster rapper that this white woman never heard of, but you know what? I'm going to play the odds on this one and say that this person is not above the exception of not letting anybody you don't know in the building. Number 2, and this is also notable, and this should also go into your calculations, and it would definitely go into my calculations before I decide to let this person in the building. So first and foremost, you're disqualified based on the neck tattoos alone. If I'm going to be called a racist because this guy happened to be a multi-platinum gangster rapper, then whatever. I would rather get judged by social media than murdered by somebody who clearly and obviously looks like he just came out of prison. But there's also a big height disparity. This guy's 6'4". There is no way in hell, even me as an adult man, I'm letting in a 6'4" dude that I don't know with a neck tattoo in the building. And yes, that is discriminatory against tall people. And yes, that is discriminatory against people who are not smart and get neck tattoos. And you know what? That's the way it is. And honestly, I would rather be able to make my case on social media as I'm being canceled rather than get murdered by this individual. However, for some reason, possibly due to that equity ideology infecting her, she decided to go with it in this way. And by the way, I think this also ties into this whole Karen narrative that is being put out on the internet.com, that all these white women are making these prejudgments about black people and getting into arguments with them, and that's all due to evil white racism, and this is something that we need to stop. Now, we've covered on this channel how most of these so-called Karen videos are just objectively nonsensical, and a lot of times the black person in the argument is actually the initiator and or the person in the wrong. Again, go look at my catalog for these instances so that you can see them. However, this seeps into the culture. And remember, the goal of this narrative is to get white women in particular to let their guard down, to stop calling the police, and ignore the intuition that they have when they feel uncomfortable in certain situations. And no woman of any race or ethnic group should do that. If you do not feel safe in a certain situation, even if it makes you look weird and or bad, I advise you, as somebody who could have a daughter someday, as somebody who is engaged, as somebody who's just a human being and could be talking about a random woman that I don't know, just like right now, say follow that intuition. There's a reason you have that. You have protective instincts for a purpose, and it's better, again, to be canceled on social media than to be murdered by somebody who you let in your building because you wanted to seem woke when that person clearly looks like he got out of prison yesterday. I'm sorry, but Billingsley is not the normal character that happens to live in the building. Now, if this guy looked like Nate the lawyer, then I would have a different calculation. If he looked like George Foreman, the black conservative perspective guy, different calculation. If he looked like Clarence Thomas, again, different calculation. And by the way, I think Clarence Thomas is also a big guy as well, but he's older. So again, your threat assessment has to be calibrated to what you're talking about. A guy with a neck tattoo, chances are he just came out of prison and or he's a gang member, but possibly and most likely and most importantly, he does not live in the same building as a tech CEO. Period, point blank. You're in Baltimore, have some awareness, one of the most dangerous cities in the entire country, and you should be able to assess this situation, and everybody should be able to assess this situation going forward. Now, I will say, if you're a woman, don't let anybody in the building. Unless you know that person, don't let them in. Go to the elevator, move on with your life. If you seem rude and or snooty, that's perfectly fine. If you make an error in the other direction, that's perfectly fine. But the overall rule of living in a major metropolitan area is don't let people in the building that you don't know. They might murder you. They might just steal your packages. It doesn't matter. You do not want to be the person who does that in your building. Look, I know I'm explaining this obvious, simple concept to you guys out there like you're a child, but apparently people need to learn this obvious, simple concept like their children, because I've seen video after video of people ignoring obvious threat indicators in order to let somebody in. I mean, there was a video, and I believe this particular woman was not a white woman. She was a black woman or a Hispanic woman. I'm not sure about the details. I saw it on Twitter a long time ago, where she's working out in the gym in her building alone. Now, the gym has an exit that goes out to the street. However, people are not supposed to enter the gym from the street level. That's just not something that is normal in that building. Well, a guy comes up, not in workout clothes at all. He's in jeans and in a hoodie. He knocks on the glass. This woman, alone in the gym, decides to let this person, who is clearly and obviously not somebody who's there to work out, in the building, even though you have all of these red flags in that situation, and he proceeds to attack this woman in the gym of her building. This was absolute madness right here. Now, luckily, this woman was actually able to fight off her attacker, who, by the way, of course, attacked her because that's what he was there to do. But you shouldn't be ignoring these obvious threat indicators in order to not seem racist, in order to seem woke, in order to seem virtuous, or any of those categories. If something does not look like it belongs there, and again, this has nothing to do with race. A black dude that's older in a suit, obviously probably somebody who might live in that building. It is Baltimore after all, and Baltimore does have its wealthy residents of all races. But in this particular scenario, the guy who has the neck tattoos, he ain't a doctor at the famous hospital that's over there that's name eludes me right now in this moment. He is not somebody who is a lawyer, although he was represented by a lawyer very recently. Now look, I know this is a little bit more rambly than my normal video, but the thing is, I genuinely feel like a huge portion of the Karen narrative is to try to get women, and specifically white women, to ignore their intuition, to ignore their instincts, especially when it comes to minority males and or specifically black males. I think that's what a lot of this happens to be about. I think that's why San Francisco tried to pass an additional law to make it illegal to call the police on a black person, even though it's already illegal to willfully and intentionally call the police on somebody for nefarious purposes. They wanted to add an extra law to infuse race into that, to essentially codify what they're doing on social media into law. This is a grave error. If you ignore your instincts, I know you might believe it can't happen to you. You are increasing the chances of it actually happening to you. So stay on guard, watch out, pay attention to those threat indicators. And again, without being racist or anything like that, if somebody or something looks like it doesn't belong, trust that feeling. And honestly, if you're going to be one of these wokies and embrace that ideology, maybe embrace the part of the ideology that I seem to remember that tells women that men, especially strangers on the street, happen to be threats. At least that would have kept this woman safe. Not this intersectional nonsense where you decide in your head as a CEO of a company or somebody who lives in an upscale building that the guy with the neck tattoo who looks like he just came out of prison is just as likely to be renting a penthouse as you are. Now, I want to send my condolences to the friends and family, but I also want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about my overall idea that the Karen narrative is trying to get women, specifically white women, to let down their guard? Let me know what you guys think about Marilyn Mosby letting this guy out early when clearly and obviously he was a dangerous person and a threat to society. Let me know all them thoughts. I will be looking forward to reading them. And as usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support link in the description of the video. This has been me talking about a tragic murder that could have been avoided at multiple levels. Till next time.